Hello friends, so today's video is going to be a list of some non-fantasy book recommendations. I obviously primarily talk about fantasy here on my channel, but I wanted to have a video dedicated to highlighting some of the non-fantasy books that I have picked up this year that I think a lot of you might also really enjoy. I am working with Book of the Month on today's video, as a lot of the books that I end up looking into and checking out that aren't fantasy, I am able to do so because of Book of the Month. They do, of course, often have fantasy books as well, for example, The Stardust Thief, which I'll mention here in a little bit, but it's great because I do try to diversify my reading a little bit. I've been trying to do this a little more for the past year, 2 years now, and they make it very, very easy to do so. Many of you know that Book of the Month is an online book subscription service where you have 5 to 7 books that you can choose from, all from different genres, and they often have debut authors, but also returning authors, very popular, always brand new hardbacks. If for one given month you're not really interested in any of the selections that they have, you can also skip that month and then you gain credits, and you can use those credits in future months. If you want, you can use those credits on books that they had in previous months, so if you join, then you can choose from something that they have from before you joined. And also it's great because as somebody who likes to read a lot of new releases to try and get the word out there about new, especially fantasy books, it's great because they often have at least one of the books that I'm interested in, which is very true for this month. They had the Stardust Thief. I'll talk about this one first and then I'll jump into the other selections from this month. Starting with the debut fantasy, The Stardust Thief. Like a certain famous lamp, this novel will grant wishes for a perfect fantasy with dark magic and a dangerous quest. After that, we have a thriller called Things We Do in the Dark. Caught in the paparazzi's glow after her husband's murder, Paris Peralta quickly learns all that glitters isn't gold. Then we have a contemporary fiction called The Lifestyle, another debut. This provocative novel asks a salacious question: why settle for the one when you could swing for twice the fun? Then we have a thriller called The Lies I Tell. This twisty cat and mouse story will have you ripping through the pages to find out who the true con woman is. Last, we have a literary fiction called Woman of Light. This epic yet intimate story shows 3 generations of women trying to make a life in the perilous 30s American West. If you are interested in checking out Book of the Month, I will have a code that you can use to get your first box for $9.99. A big thank you to Book of the Month again for working with me on today's video. The first book I'm going to mention is actually one that I got from Book of the Month, and that would be Razorblade Tears. This was on my radar because I received it, and then I saw some of my friends picking it up. Jess Owens, for example, she read it, loved it. I saw that it was, I believe, a Goodreads nominee as well, and I read it recently and I really, really liked it. It's hard to say I really enjoyed it because it is a very sad story. The setup is quite tragic, but it is following these 2 men who are ex-cons, both of whom had sons who were gay, and their sons were in a relationship with one another, but they have been murdered. And so when the story starts, we're starting right after the funeral for both of these young men. Their fathers could not be more unalike, aside from the fact that they are ex-cons. That's really the only thing that they have in common. But the 2 of them end up deciding to work together to try and find whoever murdered their sons. If you are looking for a fast-paced, heartbreaking, action-packed story, this is a great one to pick up. Another book I read recently, this one is very different from Razorblade Tears, that would be The Girl with 7 Names. This is a memoir that follows a woman's journey to not only escaping North Korea, but then trying to get her family out of North Korea as well. It is very eye-opening. It is very, very heartbreaking. I'm getting strangely more emotional thinking about it in hindsight than I was while reading it. And it was like the very, very end of the book. There's one moment that's actually just this beautiful gesture of kindness that somebody, finally this girl has a break. And that strange, I'm getting emotional thinking about it. That moment is the moment where I was like, hold it in, and then when I finished the book, there was another moment at the end where I'm like, oh, and I just was getting all emotional. I want everybody to read this. It is absolutely, I feel strange saying, oh, it's so good, it's fantastic, because it is detailing some really tragic things. For example, she talks about how she was only 7 years old when she saw her first execution. She talks about the ways in which they're raised. I say it's eye-opening. I think a lot of us are aware that it's not necessarily the easiest place to live, but the details a lot of us are very unfamiliar with. And so I just think it's an amazing journey that she, just her life in general and the things that she had to endure her wit, her intelligence, her ability to get through certain circumstances. There's so many times where I was so fearful for her. I was so fearful for her family. I was so heartbroken over some of the things that happened. I know this too, I was talking about Razorblade Tears. This is especially, I think, difficult to read because it is a real person and this is their real story. Razorblade Tears, I think, is very real for some people, whereas this is just this woman's experiences. So if you get the chance, please check this book out. It is phenomenal. Those first two books, definitely not the easiest to read, so I'm going to switch gears here and recommend some happy, fluffy types of stories, and that would be some romance books. So I'm holding books by two different authors, although there are 3 books by both of these authors out that I think you can check out. We have the Brown Sisters by Talia Hibbert, and then we have these, I don't know if there's a name for these, but we have these books by Emily Henry. So Emily Henry's romance books, I would say, feel a little bit more slice of life. There is, of course, a romantic plot line as they are romance books, but I would say these ones put a little bit more emphasis on dissecting the main character, and the side characters also are fleshed out throughout the story. There's a lot of things to connect with in these stories. For example, Beach Read has to deal with grief, which I think a lot of people can very much connect to. Those kinds of things that now I'm getting it sad again. They're happy, fluffy books, though, I promise. There's happiness to them as well as the emotional depth, but I'm saying that kind of in contrast to the Brown Sisters. These ones also have depth, but I think they explore a little bit the ways in which people are different than what you typically find with your main characters in stories. And that's a big thing that Talia Hibbert hits on. So in Get a Life, Chloe Brown, which is the one you've probably seen the most of, the main character has chronic pain, and so she's trying to navigate life as somebody who has something that the majority of people are not dealing with. Talia Hibbert's writing is a lot quirkier. There's some charm to it. They're cheeky, and the dialogue is always really silly and funny, while also having these personal struggles that the main characters are dealing with. And if you're looking for a little more steam, I would say the Brown Sisters, this trilogy, I'll call it, has a lot more steam. The other ones I would say are a little more PG-13. The next 3 I have talked about a little bit more this year, so I probably won't dive as deep into them, but I still wanted to mention them again as they are non-fantasy books that I've picked up this year, and I do, in general, want them to get a little bit more hype. And those 3 books would be Trailblazer, The Secret Life of Groceries, and The Hidden Life of Trees. But The Hidden Life of Trees, I've mentioned it recently, is a story, not a story, it's nonfiction, and it talks about the ways in which forests, old growth forests, how the trees, the plants, the fungi, everything works together to keep the forest alive. It's fascinating. I highly recommend it to everybody. Trailblazer, as it says here up at the top, a memoir by the first Black woman reporter at the Washington Post. And this is specifically detailing her experiences here in America, as that is where she grew up. She grew up in the Deep South at a time when America was segregated. And so she had to face so many obstacles. She had to overcome so much to just even get to where she was. But then you see these shifts in social norms and politics, things like that, as she was a reporter. You see her throughout her time at the Washington Post. You see how news has changed. She's just an amazing individual. I especially think this would be interesting for anybody who really enjoys journalism or enjoys learning about media and how information is delivered to us, because I think this sheds light on how that has changed throughout the years, especially because at the very end she kind of reflects back on things. And so if you're somebody who's very interested in that topic, I would definitely check this one out. And then, like I said, The Secret Life of Groceries, another one I mentioned, and I wanted to mention it again because I think it's great. I actually think the beginning of this is my least favorite and perhaps the least interesting, but that's just to me because I think everybody's interested in different things. But the author goes over the modern grocery store. It doesn't sound like it would be very interesting, but he initially details how we have gotten grocery stores the way that we have them now. And then he sort of dives into specific details about different elements of how people try to get their own recipes, their own products into grocery stores. And so that kind of mom and pop feel you get from some products. And he talks about the shrimp industry, which at the time that he wrote this, there are some individuals that are basically slaves and have had the absolute worst circumstances, and it was very difficult to read. It was heartbreaking. That's more towards the end of the book. He also talks about the transportation of goods, so the trucking industry, and he shadows a trucker. And it's just one of those things that basically everybody in, I would say, well, in America, I know it's different depending on where you live, but so many people going to the grocery store is a thing that occurs every week for a lot of people, where you just stop in the grocery store and you just buy stuff really quick and you don't even think about how the food got there, about the workers, because he also talks about the employees at grocery stores. You don't really think about how it got to be where it is. And so he goes through every single aspect of it. Last for today, we have Red Palace. This, I've seen it listed under fantasy, and it's 100% not fantasy. So if you've seen it and you're like, oh, I want to check that out, not fantasy, no fantastical elements. This is a historical fiction story that takes place in Korea. Specifically, it says 1758. So it's a historical fiction, and it's a murder mystery. And I haven't read the other books by this author, but from my understanding, that's kind of their focus, is murder mysteries in different times and different settings than we're accustomed to. So like I said, this one takes place in Korea, and the customs at that time, it's really interesting to see how trying to solve this murder, there's so much to do with class that is a part of it. There's so much to do with gender norms at that time. So for example, something like the bodies of certain individuals, they're not supposed to be touched depending on your gender. And on top of that, strangely, on top of all of that, there's a really sweet little romantic subplot. It's very small. It's not the biggest part of the book, but it was quite cute, and I liked the characters very much. That's it for some non-fantasy books that I have checked out this year and really enjoyed, and hopefully a lot of you are interested in these or have picked them up yourselves. If you have any of your own recommendations, feel free to leave those in the comments down below. And of course, a big thank you again to Book of the Month for working with me. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you all later. Bye.